Pardon me. All right, it's recording. So,
Perfect.
Jordan, thank you so much. Welcome. I am going to go ahead and open up the floor to you. I would love for you to introduce yourself. Just give us a little bit of background about who you are, where you come from, why you have so many tattoos, and just like tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I got into fitness and personal training right around high school. I started, taking classes for anatomy and physiology, and that kind of just opened me up to it. I started working at a gym and doing personal training, kind of like in the traditional context, and just found that a lot of like the methods that were being taught were not necessarily the most effective. People weren't getting the results they needed. It was really just the same repetition of all the old methods that they were still using. And basically it was clients coming in, the trainers trying to get their heart rate up so that they felt like they did some work and then trying to get them out of there. So I've been doing personal training and nutrition consulting, on and off for like the past 10 years, ever since 2009. I was in the Marine Corps and the infantry as a machine gunner for 5 years. So I worked with some of those guys on active duty. And then I got out in July of 2017 and continued to do nutrition consulting, meal prep. I'm also a chef and a sushi chef. So I do some meal prep, and I work with professional and amateur MMA fighters, as well as like the general public. Right now I do consulting and strength and conditioning work out of a place called Ultra Fit Systems MMA in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then I also am a coach at a place called F45 Functional Training.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that awesome introduction. I had no clue that you also coach at F45.
Yeah, I actually, I just got brought onto the team like a month or so ago, and we're just waiting for a new location to open up next week.
Wow, that is so cool. And then in regard to the other location where you're training at right now, is it UFC gym or?
No, this one's not a UFC gym. It's called Ultra Fit Systems MMA, but it is centered around mixed martial arts and self-defense and like body assessments and we use ultrasound and stuff like that to determine like metabolic and hormonal imbalances. It puts you into like a workout category, either density-based training, lactic acid-based training, or metabolic resistance training. So it's very, very detailed. It's very scientific and accurate. We have like hard data to kind of justify putting people into those categories. So it's super interesting.
That is so cool. So for that location, anybody can go there. You don't have to just be an expert in, what's the ideal person to walk into that building?
So for Ultra Fit Systems, it's a pretty wide range. I mean, we've got kids classes there. We've young kids, from 5 all the way up until their teens and early 20s, going there for self-defense. They're going there for things like Muay Thai if they get private instruction, Jiu-Jitsu. We have a really great instructor, Darren Mowry, who's has his purple belt, I think with his first stripe through the Gracie Academy.
Uh-huh.
So he's doing our Jiu-Jitsu program. We've also got personal trainers there that do corrective exercise, nutrition consulting like me, strength and conditioning. We have a couple other practitioners like Nathan Kohlerman, I think you might know. He does this thing called DNS. It's dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. And he also does animal flow. We've got muscle activation therapists. So it's a pretty wide range. We've got professional MMA fighters all the way down to, the other end where people are really just looking to get like some advice on general fitness and nutrition and actually get some results out of it.
Wow, that seems really cool. If like I was in your area, I would definitely be going to the gym.
Yeah, it's like a giant playground. We've got huge monkey bars going over the jiu-jitsu mats. We've got an MMA area with, grappling mats and heavy bags, double end bags. We have a weighted area, with Olympic bars and, cardio equipment, rowing machines, stuff like that. So it's pretty all encompassing, but especially for a fitness practitioner or personal trainer or whatever, it's like a giant playground. So it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. That's very, very cool. And that's in Scottsdale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So if you guys are in Scottsdale, I would definitely go check it out. That's really cool. So let's go ahead, Jordan, and like really hop into the juicy topics that we planned on discussing today, and wanted to open up with, first of all, talking about keto. So for those individuals who are unfamiliar about what keto is, it is a higher fat, typically higher fat diet, moderate protein, and lower carb diet. So your body is usually running off of ketones, which come from your body's fat, and not running off of glucose. And Jordan, I just want to ask you how you got into keto and why you have so much knowledge in regard to the keto space, because you know a lot about it.
So, like I mentioned, I've been doing nutrition and, I've been a chef and been doing personal training for quite a while. So I was aware of the ketogenic diet. I wasn't really well versed in it until I started practicing it, but I honestly started practicing it on accident. I happened to have a bunch of, ribeye steak and macadamia nuts and avocado and coconut oil and things like that, like just lying around my house. I just had a
You sound so
very
healthy.
random, yeah, like it was a very random and unplanned supply of ketogenic foods, which I had no idea about. But I've had, kind of some bumps and bruises, aches and pains from the military and things like that. And I noticed every day that I woke up after eating those foods and only those foods, I was having less pain. I was waking up with more energy. I was sleeping through the night. I was noticing like less bloating in my face, like I was losing water weight, and I didn't really understand what was going on. Not that I was upset about it. I was very happy about it. But I was like, this is kind of cool. I don't know why I'm waking up with more energy. And like, it's a very noticeable effect, day by day.
And energy, I mean, I got the goosebumps because like having energy can impact your whole day and how you are productive and function in society.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it, in a way, it kind of changes your level of consciousness and like how you experience the world. If you're having a really crappy day, everything seems crappy. The people that you interact with, it seems like they have a problem or an attitude. You hit every red light on the way to work. There's always something.
Yeah.
You have energy and you're in a good mood and you have justification to be in a good mood. That kind of carries over and you have that momentum behind you. So
right.
After 3 or 4 days, I noticed that I had a lot of energy, and basically kind of connected the dots with my previous knowledge of nutrition and fitness, and figured out that I was in ketosis. Did some more research on it, figured out that, my macros were in sync with a ketogenic diet because I was basically having 0 carbs, not even 5%.
Right.
And ever since then, I just like fell in love with it. Conceptually, it makes sense. I really like that it's been used for, well, technically over 100 years. It was originally developed as a therapeutic diet for people with epilepsy, autism. Now it's being used for people with type 2 diabetes to get them off their insulin. The fact that it's a natural state that your body goes into when you're carb deficient or you don't have glucose. For me, that's a very scientific and justifiable reason to use it if it's a natural mechanism that your body already has. Mm-hmm. So if you can utilize carbs and glucose and fat and ketones, why wouldn't you?
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with me. Excuse me, Jordan. So I've heard people say that, the keto diet, you shouldn't do it just for weight loss. And that's just a quick fix diet, which I personally don't like. If somebody wants to lose weight and they're overweight, probably going keto would actually be very beneficial to them. And I personally believe that if you want to lose weight, going keto is a great way to do it. And it's if you have a person who's extremely overweight and, they've gotten to this point in their life, they're probably eating lots of foods that are inflammatory to their body, and they're eating like processed foods, all these carbs. And so I just want to know why, what your take is on that. And if you can, I know you mentioned it helps with people who are managing their type 2 diabetes and things like that. Like I was pre-diabetic before I went keto. But can you just tell me about your intake on going keto for weight loss and why that would be beneficial? And then transition into what if somebody doesn't want to go keto to lose weight?
Yeah. So, for weight loss, as you mentioned, a ketogenic diet would be a great route to go. If people are a little bit tentative about it, or they think it's a fad, some kind of like online social media thing that, gets results on the front end, but isn't necessarily sustainable. You could start just by cutting out, starchy carbs, processed sugars and carbs, liquid fruit, things like that, if you kind of want to ease into it and see how your body reacts.
And you say liquid fruit as in juice, right?
As in juice, yes. That's one of the more dangerous parts about nutrition that a lot of people don't realize. You can only process a certain amount of fruit sugar versus regular sugar, and it's about half the amount of regular sugar, which can only be stored in your liver versus being stored throughout your whole body. So
right.
Deceptively unhealthy concept to, like post-workout, just shove, half a pound of fruit into a blender, liquefy it, breaking up all the fiber, which balances out the sugar and the carbs, and just basically using that, it deposits into your liver. You can, like I said, you can only process a certain amount.
And before we go on, just really quickly, Jordan, because some people, they're like, wait, it's stored in the liver. They might not know what that is. And so fructose comes from fruit, and that actually gets stored in your liver. And then when you consume, say, a white potato or white rice, that actually, those carbohydrates get stored in your muscle, correct?
Yes, exactly. Because those are full of glucose. And fructose is fructose. It comes from fruit. So any sugar that is listed in, like a smoothie or a juice or, from fruit, anything like that, it won't specify if it's, glucose, fructose, or sucrose. But if it says sugar and it comes from a fruit source, whether it's from concentrate or not, it's going to be from fructose. And your processing rate for that is only about 30 grams per hour on average. Whereas glucose, it can be up to, 60 or 70. And the biggest difference not only is that, half as effective as far as the processing rate, but glucose can be stored throughout your entire body in every single muscle, whereas fructose can't. So fructose can only be stored in your liver. So once you reach that 30 grams per hour, all that excess fructose that is not bound and kind of filtered out with fiber is going to be stored as fat, and it usually gets stored as fat closest to the liver because that's easiest for the body, and that tends to be love handles and the fat that people can accumulate on their hips towards their back.
Right. And then so 30 grams, just to give people an idea, is that would be like a large banana, right?
Yeah, probably a large banana, or like two medium ones. It is going to be case by case depending on the kind of fruit that you eat, or, there's fructose in vegetables too, in some of them. But it's really going to depend on the net carbs or the net sugar, because fiber will subtract from some of that. So my go-to fruit is usually blackberries and raspberries, because they have some fiber in it. They're low sugar, low carb, and they still taste like fruit because they are fruit. So, but if you have things like blueberries, those are a little bit higher in carbs. So I tend to stay away from those so I can afford myself a little bit more volume.
Right. Okay. This is all really great. I love it.
Like you were saying, as far as people getting into it for weight loss, what I was mentioning about, kind of easing into it. If you just want to try low carb or cut out starchy or processed carbs, I actually just recommended that to one of my friends, and I'm helping him kind of go through that process, because sometimes that drastic change can be a little too much for people. But basically the simplest way that it works is, if you store 1 gram of carbohydrates in your body, you've got up to 4 grams of water that are attached to that carbohydrate. So even if you're not changing your workout or exercise routine, you're not necessarily going ketogenic. If you just restrict those carbs, whenever you burn those carbs off, all that water will come with it. So that's usually why the weight loss is quickest in the beginning when people start keto, because it's both fat loss and just general weight loss, a lot of which is water weight.
Yeah.
And you can see that momentum at the beginning, and then people start to plateau a little bit, or what they think is a plateau. They think it's slowing down. They're like, oh, it's not working anymore. But that's really just your body finding an equilibrium in homeostasis, where you really are not just dropping weight, you're switching from burning glucose into fat. So it's more sustainable. It's more of a slow and steady pace.
Right. Absolutely. I think I was just in conversation 2 days ago about somebody who, I said the same thing, like, you're going to lose more weight your first month, or at least especially week going keto. And it's a lot of that's going to be water weight. And then, simultaneously people get discouraged, but and then, people will get discouraged when their pee stick stops showing up, but it's like, no, that's actually a good thing because your body's getting more efficient at actually running in ketosis. And,
exactly.
yeah, like you don't want to be peeing out all the ketones that you actually, you're still going to be burning fat. It's just going to be a little bit more efficient. Your body, your brain, everything's just going to run better and smoother.
Exactly. It's the same concept as, if people get, urine tests at work or like the military, they have drug tests and things like that. Sometimes excess protein can show up in your urine. That doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, my nutrition's on point. It means that your body is either not efficient at processing that protein and it's not bioavailable, or you're having too much. And it's the same concept with exogenous ketones or fat with ketones. The urine strips are really only going to measure that excess beta hydroxybutyrate. So once you become more efficient at processing that, it'll be retained in your body and used as fuel.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So I know that was a great answer. So basically, all in all, to recap, Jordan, if people don't want to go keto, at least like going a little bit more low carb is going to be super beneficial. Watching out for all that fruit, because let me tell you something, there are so many people like, well, I eat lots of fruit. I'm really healthy. Like I'm eating all this fruit. It's like you just said, well, if you eat too much, it's actually going to be, used against you and stored as fat, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And your liver, it's hard on your liver too, correct?
Yes, very hard on your liver. You can actually develop non-alcoholic fatty liver disease from having things, like too much fruit, or, most people will get a fatty liver from drinking alcohol, but having too much fruit, especially liquid fruit where all the fiber is just completely liquefied, it's very easy to get a fatty liver like that.
Right. Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I'm sure for some people that's like, what? Like they're probably like, oh my God.
When I found that out, I stopped going to Whole Foods and getting those like protein fruit smoothies after my workouts, and I've always had a hard time like getting rid of like love handles or that excess fat on your hips towards your back. And even with targeted exercise or calorie restriction or deprivation, I didn't notice any real effects from that until I cut out liquid fruit, and it was just like day by day I could see different results with it, and it blew my mind. I was a little disappointed because I love fruit and I love fruit smoothies, but everything has to be measured in moderation.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for the people listening to this, I don't want you guys to like get discouraged and think you can't have fruit. If you have the choice between picking up a donut and having a fruit bowl, have a fruit bowl. That would be the better alternative. So just things to just be aware of. I know Ruben's family members, they came to stay with us, a few of them, and every time they come to stay with us, they bring home juice. And we're like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, they just kept gallons. And we're like, no. Like, they're like, wait, we thought this was healthy. And it's just so crazy because so much of our society, they just don't know.
You develop that conditioned response of whether it's having like a huge amount of fruit or having, something like a glass of orange juice, you associate a feeling like a blood sugar crash with a meal. And if you want to test the theory to, whether it's valid or not, if you wanted to, wake up fasted and have a giant glass of orange juice, you will have a giant blood sugar crash probably within the next 45 minutes. And when you pay attention to that and you're conscious of it, it's crazy, like how much of an effect that food has on your body immediately. It's not like, oh, make this change and in 6 months, maybe you'll see a difference in a before and after picture. It's like meal by meal.
Right. Yeah. Cool. All right. So thank you for sharing that, Jordan. We talked about if somebody doesn't want to go keto. And then let's really quickly have 2 more questions. I want to ask you your thoughts. Well, first of all, we didn't go into, so keto is a means to an end diet. If you can just quickly touch on that. And then afterwards, I think that will kind of lead us into metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we talked about before, the ketosis is a natural state of the body whenever it's carb deprived or carb deficient. So it's a means to an end because even though our bodies are designed to work off of fat and glucose, mainly because of the food that we have available and the ease of food availability, we've conditioned ourselves to only run off of glucose and carbs because the easiest foods that you're going to be able to get and the cheapest ones are full of carbs. So if you never give your body a chance to run off of fat, it's not really going to be very efficient at it. it's still going to know how. You could get basically anybody into ketosis if you starve them of carbs for a couple of days. But if you're constantly spiking your insulin and your blood sugar by snacking every few hours, it doesn't really matter if you cut your calories in half or you're eating the exact same amount by calorie surplus or deficit. If you're constantly doing that, you're never going to have a chance to burn fat. Your body's going to burn the carbs off as much as possible. And right when you start to get a blood sugar crash and it's about to burn fat, you eat another meal. So ketosis and the ketogenic diet is really about developing the metabolic flexibility, like you said, and the mitochondrial machinery to burn fat and convert it into ketones and run off of fuel. So if you really wanted to just try keto and develop that metabolic flexibility, what I usually recommend doing is doing a strict ketogenic diet of no more than 5 or 7% carbs for 3 months, and then switching back to, not having like a yo-yo diet, but you can switch back to a more carbohydrate rich diet.
Yeah.
And you'll have the flexibility to both efficiently burn carbs and efficiently burn fat, as long as they're not in combination with each other.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know if we touched or covered this, or some people might really be unaware of like what metabolic flexibility is. And that is, I think, Jordan just said it, is your ability to burn fat when carbs are not present. And then, when they are present, to burn, use carbs and glucose, but when they're not, your body can easily transition into burning fat. Correct, Jordan?
Yes, exactly. So if your body hasn't burned fat in 2 weeks or 6 months or 10 years, which is a very real possibility and a reality for a lot of people, it's not going to be efficient at burning it. Just like it doesn't matter, if you're a bodybuilder and you look like you're in fantastic shape, but you go on a 10-mile run, you're not going to be in the same relative shape, relative to that exercise. So being efficient in one area doesn't mean that you're going to be efficient in another. So you at least need to give your body a break, give it a chance to run off of a different fuel, which is not artificial or superficial. It's a fuel that we're meant to run off of. So
yes, and I'm so happy.
Which one you run better off of, then more power to you. But why not utilize 2 fuel sources rather than 1?
Yeah, you've said this a few times, and I really love that you're saying it's like your body's natural state. Like it's natural for us to actually run in this state. And I mean, I was just in the locker room like a month ago, and I was overhearing these girls talking about, like, I think they were talking about the keto diet, because they were like making a huge deal about actually not consuming carbs and how they could never imagine possibly doing that. And it's like they couldn't even fathom that fact. And when people hear the word keto, they like freak out sometimes, like, to not have carbs, like what? And like when I first heard that I needed to go keto to help with my health stuff, I was the same way. And I'm like, I'm going to lose my muscle. Like, how am I going to work out? How am I going to perform? Like this, like, it's so unreal to some people. So, I think it's because people they don't actually know that it's natural. Like this is natural for our body to be in this state, and to switch over into just burning fat. And like you said, Jordan, and a very easy way to do that is like going ahead and eliminating all. So like with me, Jordan, I don't eat, like I eat single ingredient carbs. You know what I mean? Like if I was going through a phase like a month ago, I was being a little naughty and I was having a flour tortilla every day. I know. And I started breaking out on my back, and I knew exactly what it was because that was the only thing I was doing different. And, but yeah, it's single ingredient carb sources, which therefore they won't actually, the chances of them spiking your blood sugar aren't going to be as likely. So sweet potatoes, that's like my go-to carb, sweet potato.
Yeah, no, that's a great one.
And sweet potato again. But that's going to be a safer bet versus like going for, carbohydrate sources that will immediately spike your insulin and just never have you being able to, like, the possibility of you being able to switch into being in a fat burning place will be a little bit more challenging if your insulin levels are always spiking up. So that typically comes from consuming simple carbs. And Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't fruit technically a simple carb?
Fruit is a carb.
Mhm.
It does have a slightly insulinogenic response, but fruit doesn't actually spike your blood sugar because blood sugar is measured glucose,
Okay.
and fruit has fructose in it, so it does have a mild effect,
That's
mostly
true.
because it's got fiber in it, and fiber is technically a carb,
Yep.
but it's like a net deficit carb. That's
That's
why
right.
if you want to get your net carbs, you can subtract fiber from carbs, and that'll give you your net carbs. So it does have a small effect, but it's not comparable to like a rice cake or a bowl of mashed potatoes or something like that.
Right. Okay. So my question to you is, Jordan, and I think we kind of touched on this in the beginning. So why are berries a very good go-to keto fruit to have versus watermelon or a banana?
So the berries are just going to have more fiber in them naturally, and something like watermelon is going to be comprised of a lot of water. But because of the texture of it, if you just think about the texture of foods, you can think about how much fiber is probably in it. You could probably grab a piece of watermelon and rub it between your fingers and it'll just disintegrate. That's
Mhm.
because it's mostly water and sugar and carbs. It doesn't really have fiber to hold everything together. Versus if you do that with blueberries or strawberries or blackberries or raspberries, you're just going to get fruit crap all over your fingers because it's going to break down, but it's not going to completely disintegrate because
Right.
it's got that fibrous matrix like holding everything together. And that fibrous matrix that comes from carbohydrate fibers in fruit is what is going to balance out the sugar and kind of cancel some of it out.
That makes sense. You know what? And like going back to what we were even talking about earlier, it's all coming in full circle. They say with the keto diet to have fruit in moderation, obviously berries. I never really put it all together though that I'm just brainstorming right now, Jordan. Technically, like you can eat would it, like I'm genuinely asking you this question because I don't know. Um, can you eat basically like as much fruit as you want and not get kicked out of ketosis?
No. I can see how you would think that because it's not necessarily spiking your insulin, and I kind of like that caveat. Close, almost there. The reason that you can't is because your liver is going to be producing ketones while you're in ketosis. So whenever your liver is depleted of carbohydrates and doesn't have glycogen anymore, that's when you get kicked into ketosis. But if you fill up your liver with carbohydrates, which is coming from the fruit because fructose has to be stored there, you will get kicked out of ketosis. So if you do want to have a larger amount of fruit, it would be better to do it in a carb deficient state after you've had an insulin spike earlier in that day. So you're not quite as insulin sensitive and it's not going to all be processed, into your liver. So if you are going to do that, definitely make sure it's solid fruit. It's going to be spaced out and after your first insulin spike of the day.
I love that. Okay. That makes total sense. I always say like to do 10 to 15 grams immediately post workout because that's the research from that I've done. It makes sense. And I feel like it's not enough to actually throw you out of ketosis, and your body your liver has the stores to handle that amount of fruit. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that amount sounds pretty appropriate. I actually utilize that after a workout.
Mhm.
That there's a study that I just read like a month or two ago about increasing protein synthesis post workout, and it's a combination of a couple different types of things. So usually your protein synthesis in homeostasis, like when you're not working out, is going to be between 30 and 40 grams per hour. You can increase that after a workout, but you can double it if you have the right combination of micro and macro ingredients. So if you combine a lean protein source with carbohydrates, mainly glucose, a small amount of fructose, salt, and omega-3 fatty acids, you can double your protein synthesis. But it's got to be all of those things because they activate this sodium channel that has to be activated through sodium. So you need good salt, something like pink Himalayan salt or Redmond, and then it's got to be combined with the omega-3 fatty acids, which is good for inflammation,
So that
helps
would be
produce
like
good cholesterol.
a sardine or something.
Yeah, you could do sardines. I usually do liquid omega-3s just because it's easier for me. But
Great idea.
being a sushi chef and a chef, I tend to get that stuff from like salmon, yellowtail, some tuna. but I try to get it from whole food sources as much as I can. But usually, a general go-to post-workout meal for me would be like half of a rice cake, so that I do get a big insulin spike to absorb that lean protein, but it's going to go back down really quickly versus having a bowl of rice. You're going to have a big insulin spike, but it's going to take longer for your body to process it. So I have like half or a full rice cake, lean protein source like chicken or turkey, a couple teaspoons of omega-3 oil, some salt water, which I've always got salt in my water, and then some fructose. So I might have raspberries or blackberries, but I usually will do asparagus because that's got some fructose in it, and it will help you lose a little bit more water weight. So combining all those different things is kind of like a little science experiment to figure out what works best for your body. But if you would like to eat 75 grams of protein after your workout, because you're going to be hungry, and your body can only synthesize 40 per hour, you need to kind of know what you can do to increase that protein synthesis level.
Right. And for those of the individuals who are maybe unaware of what protein synthesis is, can you?
Yeah. So that's, amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So if you have straight protein, your body is going to need to break that down into amino acids and then kind of build it back up into the protein that is within your muscles. Or if you consume amino acids that are coming straight from, like an amino acid profile or BCAAs or something like that, then they will get built up into protein. But it's basically converting protein or the protein building blocks into muscle tissue. Okay. So it's the amount, it's the rate at which you can convert protein and or amino acids into muscle. So if you're having 80 grams of protein, let's say in 1 hour, but you can only synthesize 40, that extra 40 is not, it's not a one-to-one thing, but the majority of that excess that will not get synthesized is either going to be excreted, through urine or sweat or something like that, or through gluconeogenesis, it's going to get converted into carbs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it. So to recap, protein synthesis is your body's ability to actually help build muscle.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. But no, I love that. Like you do like the technical terminology, and then like to recap is to build muscle for like like everything that you're saying. Like I love it. Like I'm following. But there's I just want to make sure for some individuals, like this how we talk and how we understand it still can be very foreign to some people. So
yes, exactly. And I'm definitely a science nerd when it comes to this kind of stuff. So sometimes I can get caught up in that momentum, and I'll find myself reading research articles and studies and listening to podcasts like, oh, let me go to the store and get this kind of food.
No, I love it. Cause like I know, okay, like in general terms, like, okay, protein synthesis, I have a high level overview about what it is, but like you just explained it in a way that I've like, oh my God, this is really cool. Okay. This makes sense. Like I've never heard it like that, but okay. Yeah. So like, thank you for explaining it like that.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. I was just doing research, just like looking up last night or 2 nights ago, what actually happens when you overeat protein, because your body can only process so much protein at one time. And like from the research, like what you basically just answered my question. I should have just asked Jordan. And then what the article is saying, like it will actually though use the nutrients that you're getting from that food still, like it'll still take the vitamins and minerals. But everything else, like your body, it's just like, there's no point in having that amount of excess like protein if your body can't process it all at one time. But I didn't know like, okay, that's the, what you just explained, how it can possibly go into gluconeogenesis, and everything else that we just talked about.
Yeah. So it's really important to understand like the protein synthesis levels. Gluconeogenesis has its place. It's a really inefficient energy conversion process. But if you think about it in terms of units of energy, if you've got 7 ATP from protein and it needs to get converted into glucose, you end up at a net calorie or net energy deficit of about 3. So you'll be at 4 ATP. So if you're on a ketogenic diet specifically, I mean, you could technically do it on a carb heavy diet. But if you are going to overeat on anything, it's better to overeat on protein because it has a thermic effect. It's got, a satiating effect, but also that excess protein that you're not going to be synthesizing will get converted into carbs, but it's not necessarily going to kick you out of ketosis because you're going to be at a net energy and net calorie deficit. So you can actually burn some calories from overeating on protein. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean you should do it, but if you know you're at a net calorie deficit and you've reached your fat for the day, you don't want to, increase your insulin or blood sugar by having carbs. It's better to have a lean protein source so that the excess of that will get converted through gluconeogenesis and you'll actually end up at a net energy deficit.
I love that. And that kind of just goes into this first week with my clients. Like, I have them focusing on eating protein. When in doubt, just making sure you're having a protein source for many of the reasons that you just listed off. So thank you. And then, Jordan, I think we are pretty much like out of time. But I wanted to just close out and just have you basically, I think that's it. Like, we basically went through all of our questions that we had lined up and we're out of time. So,
perfect. Nailed it.
So helpful. Can you really quickly like close out, letting everybody know like what you eat in a day, like from the time you wake up, from the time you go to sleep, like a overview of what you eat, and then we'll close out, and then this will be at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you and I kind of talked about, keto is a means to an end. So I don't necessarily practice keto every day. It is kind of, a fun science experiment to manipulate the way your body looks and feels, because you know that you can based off of your diet. But on days and weeks that I am doing strict keto, if I'm not fasting in the morning, if I am, I just have black coffee and water until I break my fast with a lean protein source, a little bit of carbs, and then I'll have fat later on. But if I'm not fasting, which is a majority of the time, 4 or 5 days a week, I usually will start my morning with black coffee, with salt water, eggs. I'll usually mix in something like Wagyu beef fat, so it's all rendered down. It's just straight fat. That helps get the ratios right. I'll add in ghee, which is filtered butter. It's butter with no dairy or lactose in it, so it's a really great way to go. Mm-hmm. I'll add in coconut oil, avocado oil, salt, pepper. Sometimes I'll throw in a little bit of organic peanut butter, but usually in the morning I try to keep the carbs basically to zero.
Yeah.
So for that, I might add in like Italian sausage and make scrambled eggs with bacon and basically just do a big breakfast bowl.
That sounds really good.
No, I love it. I'm actually fasting right now, but I'm getting a little hungry thinking about it.
Right, I know. I've not eaten either, and you're making me hungry. I'm like, shit, that sounds really good.
So, that's how I would usually start my mornings. It's always going to be eggs because they've got acetylcholine in it, which is a really good, basically a nootropic. It's like brain food. It's got omega-3s in it. If you get the good, brown AA eggs, those are really healthy for you. I'll add in that
and organic.
Yes, organic, because I used to think a lot of that stuff was honestly bullshit. And there are giant companies who sometimes have some BS organic labels, but if you look at the studies, or even if you just look at food side by side, like you have a soy or grain-fed steak versus a grass-fed, you can see and feel the difference. It's got different cooking times. If you look at brown eggs versus white eggs, this neon bright yellow yolk versus like this dark orange, like healthy looking yolk with good cholesterol in it. It's pretty irrefutable that there is a difference between organic and non-organic. So it really just comes down to the quality of your foods. Does it make more sense to eat beef from cows that have been fed food that has to be, dried out from making soybean oil for restaurants and they have to feed them these cakes? Or does it make more sense to eat beef from cows that are just naturally grazing in pastures and eating their normal food, which is grass?
Right.
So in a sense, it's common sense, but only when you start to connect the dots and like really look into the details of it, then the light bulb goes on.
Right. And, in most restaurants, you're not going to unfortunately find grass-fed beef.
No, because for them, it's honestly, it's a short-term, cheaper option for them to buy less land, pack all these animals into one spot, and basically get these soy cakes from factories that make soybean oil for restaurants. And it's just the leftovers from it. They can feed that to the cows to fatten them up, which also speeds up their milk production. So it's beneficial for them. Mm-hmm. But in the long term, if they were to convert that to something into like pasture raised, then you really have no expenses, for the most part, because the cows are going to be eating grass, which is their food, and then fertilizing the grass, which they will later on eat. So it's a more healthy and natural cycle.
Right. And then really quickly, just to go back to the eggs, like I will, it's safest to eat food at home, but like
Yes,
there's
absolutely.
certain foods like not that I really try to avoid altogether when I'm out. And one of them is eggs for me. Just because they're so high, aren't they very high in omega-3s?
Well, healthy eggs should be high in omega-3s because
Mhm.
those are the ones that are good for you. But the bad eggs and, soy-fed beef or
Omega-6.
meat is going to have, that's going to have more omega-6s. And if you're doing something like the ketogenic diet, you don't want a lot of omega-6 anyway. You need a little bit. But if you're doing the keto diet, your body's going to run off of whatever your body has more of. So if it has way too much omega-6 and that causes inflammation, you might be burning fat and also increasing inflammation and having joint pain and not really knowing what's going on. Whereas if you just bought the brown organic eggs instead of the white ones, it's going to have an inverse ratio of omega-3 to omega-6.
And isn't that the same thing goes for animals that are not organic, grass pasture raised? The meat is very high in omega-6 as well.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of that comes from the food that they eat. Um, Men are not really supposed to have a huge amount of soy because it's estrogenic, it's aromatizing, but it also has this bloating and inflammatory effect. So when you only feed soy to cows, which they're not evolutionarily adapted to eating soy. They're supposed to be eating grass. They're ruminants that are meant to eat grass and convert that into muscle tissue. It's going to produce inflammation, and it produces this marbling inside their muscle, which is the meat that we eat. And a lot of restaurants or a lot of people kind of covet that look, like the marbling of like Kobe or Wagyu beef. And it's an easier and cheaper option for them. But the inflammation or the omega-6s that come from those foods are from the foods that the cows eat or whatever animal it is.
Yeah. And we didn't even get into like really like the whole inflammation. That's another topic, but okay.
Yeah, all together.
Another conversation. All right, really quickly, let's finish out. You got your breakfast done. And then what is it just in like 1 minute, the rest of your day looking like eating wise?
So if I have breakfast, like right after I wake up, like I said, it's those eggs, Wagyu fat, ghee, coconut oil, avocado oil, salt, pepper. That's basically it. Later on in the day, I'll usually shift my ratios. So I'll either do carbs and protein in the afternoon, or I'll do carbs and protein at night. Obviously never carbs and fat. So after those eggs, I might not eat for another 4 or 5 hours, but usually it's if I end up doing carbs and protein, I'll have something like spinach and kale, asparagus with butter, salt, and pepper, and then like oven roasted or pan seared chicken breast or something like that. And then later on in the night is when I'll add in more fats like avocado, macadamia nuts, pecans. But really, if you kind of put your food into categories, you can kind of pick and choose what you want to eat each day. So it's not like every day for lunch, I'm going to have asparagus and chicken. Every morning, I'm going to have eggs and bacon.
Yeah, you can have your breakfast for dinner, and you know what I mean? Like it doesn't.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Carbs are shown to, because they have that insulin and blood sugar spike and fall, they can help you sleep a little bit. So sometimes I'll make those eggs at night. I'll put a little bit of honey on there, cinnamon to keep my blood sugar, stabilized. But yeah, I'll absolutely have eggs and bacon for dinner.
Yeah. So for the keto-ish, more so keto-ish peeps, like if you're going to have carbs, like to recap, ideally like post-workout would be a great time, just a little bit.
Yes.
But then also right before bed too. So because right, Jordan?
Yeah, definitely.
Like from my like low carb peeps.
Yeah, I would definitely do it either after a workout because you're going to be insulin sensitive, so you can capitalize on that insulin response by having it with a lean protein source, especially if you do that other stuff we talked about to increase your protein synthesis.
Mm-hmm.
But also if you want to have a little bit more flexibility with the carbs, as long as you're not combining it with fats, have that at night. And especially because you're going to be insulin sensitive, you'll notice a bit of a blood sugar crash, an energy dip, and then you'll be ready for bed.
So question now, so your breakfast is very similar to mine, but what I do for breakfast, and I'm pretty sure this is why you may not do it, I don't know. I like saute my spinach in coconut oil. Do you not have vegetables in the morning because of their carbs?
For the most part, yeah.
Like, would you do that? Like, have you ever tried that?
I haven't tried cooking it in oil before. Honestly, I will usually stay away from having greens and stuff like that with fats just because it has some carbs in it. Honestly, I wouldn't really worry about it. You can probably combine those and be completely fine because it's mostly fiber that is subtracting from those carbs, and you would have to eat an inordinate amount of spinach and kale to have a giant insulin spike. So I wouldn't really worry about that, but I tend to just kind of group things into categories. Like, okay, in the morning I'll have fat, or I'll have fat and protein. And then in the afternoon I'll do carbs and protein. And then at night I'll do fat, or I'll do carbs and protein. So I kind of just do categories and be a little bit more strict about it.
Now, I do not have kale, and I'm sure, I don't know, like the oleic acid in kale, like I'm surprised to hear that you eat it. I don't know, like, have you heard the research on that and things like that about kale?
Yeah, so oleic acid is something that is a little bit harder to be converted into good cholesterols, and for like anti-inflammation. Kale has some other benefits to it, so you really just have to weigh out the pros and cons. You really, like, what I try to do is eat with intention. So every ingredient that I put into my meals has an intention behind it. If I'm having eggs in the morning, it's because it's got acetylcholine to jumpstart my brain, and it's got omega-3s for anti-inflammation. If I have some honey on there to, give me a little bit more energy, I put cinnamon on there to help maintain my blood sugar. So everything's kind of got a reason behind it. But generally when I do my spinach and kale, it's a 50-50 mix, and it's literally just a small handful, and I just eat it by itself. So I kind of just do that. Yep, straight out of the plastic box.
Wow, that's great. I don't
just to make sure I'm getting them in,
Yeah, hey, there you go. Cool. Well, this has been awesome. I love having you on. I've learned so much today, and it's really sharpened my skills. And it's like, shit, like, for a while, Jordan, I kind of phased out of like doing so much, I guess I want to say, geeky inner science research and things like that. Just, being an entrepreneur, it's like, okay, I need to focus on business things and not focus on like this, which is like what I'm truly passionate about. So it's been really awesome speaking with you, because like you are so smart and your wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I know we went way over our time.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
I told you I can nerd out on this stuff. So.
I know. So can we close out? Can you just remind everybody where they can find you, what your social media is, because I don't think we said it on here, and like, again, where you're located and how they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got like a type form on my Instagram. I mainly use that for clients and fighters. My Instagram handles is my first and last name, Jordan Smock, and then 1991.
Can you spell
if
that?
you're in JORDAN SMOCK 1991. And then I'll have a link on there for my type form. If people want to get in contact with me, they can send me a DM or fill out that form. If you're in Arizona, if you live here, if you're visiting, you can check out UltraFit Systems MMA. It is in Scottsdale, over on Hayden by the Scottsdale Air Park, or we've got F45 in Old Town Scottsdale. So any one of those would be perfectly fine. Even if people have questions or they want to try out the low carb or keto thing, I'm always happy to answer questions and kind of help people get into a more healthy routine that's sustainable for them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jordan. All right.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's always fun.
You're welcome. Okay, guys, so you know where to find him. Make sure you go follow him. He is a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind if you send him a message and ask him a few questions.
Not at all.
Okay, Jordan, let me go ahead and